and smiled. "You look lost." Her voice was warm, melodic, the kind of voice that made you want to lean closer. "I'm not." I said too quickly, I just saw the sign about open studio." She set down her brush. "First time?" I nodded. "What's your medium?" "Sculpture, mostly clay, some stone, when I can afford it." Her eyes lit up. "A sculptor." "God, we never get sculptors come here." "Let me show you the back room. There's a whole section for three-dimensional work." She grabbed my hand before I could protest. Her skin was warm paint-stained electricund. I followed her like I was under a spell. Her name was Elena Marie Vaz, she told me that night, over cheap coffee in styrofoam cups. That she was from money, old money, the kind of money that came with last names that were also street names. "My family owns half of Greenwich," she said, laughing like it was embarrassing. "Old mansions full of old furniture and old ideas they wanted me to go to Yale, marry someone appropriate, pop out some airs." She wrinkled her nose. "I ran away instead, came to Detroit because it felt real raw, like a city that understood pain. I didn't know what to say to Thady'd never met someone who chose to be poor." "What about you?" she asked. "What's your story, Ruth Callahan?" Nobody had asked me that in years. "There's no story." I said, "I'm just here working, trying to make things." "Everyone has a story." She leaned closer, her knee touched mine under the table. "Tell me yours." So Didi told her about my mother, about the cancer, about the funeral. I told her about the marble block in my apartment, about the sculpture I'd been working on for 6 months, about the way my mother's face kept appearing in the stone, and how I couldn't stop until I set her free. Elena listened, really listened. Her eyes never left my face. And when I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I want to see it." "What?" "Your sculpture, the one of your mother." Her grip tightened. "Can you show me?" I should have said No'd never shown my work to anyone. It was too personal, too raw to me, but something about Elena made me feel safe, made me feel seen. "Okay," I whispered. We walked to my apartment in the rain. She didn't complain about the neighborhood, didn't wrinkle her nose at the smell in the hallway, didn't judge the peeling wallpaper or the flickering lights. She just followed me up 3 flights of stairs and waited while I unlocked the door, and then she saw her, the weeping mother. She wasn't finished yet. The face was complete, my mother's face, frozen in an expression of grief so profound it made my chest ache every time I looked at it. But the body was still rough, unpolished. The hands were just shapes, reaching for something that wasn't there. Elena stood in the doorway. She didn't move. She didn't speak for a full minute. She just looked, and then she started to cry, not dramatic sobs, not theatrical weeping, just silent tears rolling down her cheeks, catching the light from the street lamp outside. "Ruth," her voice was barely a whisper, "this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." I didn't know how to respond. Nobody had ever called my work beautiful. Nobody had ever looked at something I made and wept. "It's not finished," I said lamely. "It's already a masterpiece." She turned to face me. Her eyes were shining. "You're a genius, Ruth, do you know that? You're a fucking genius, and you're rotting away in this apartment. And nobody knows, nobody sees." She grabbed my shoulders. "I see you. I see what you can do, and I'm going to help you show the world." Elena moved into my apartment 2 weeks later. She brought a suitcase, a box of art supplies, and a bottle of expensive wine that cost more than my monthly rent. "Roommates," she announced, kicking off her designer boots. "Partners, we're going to take over the art world together." I should have asked questions, should have wondered why a woman from Greenwich money wanted to share a cockroach-infested studio apartment in Detroit, but I was lonely, and she was like a hurricane, bright and loud and overwhelming. She made me feel like I was standing in the eye of the storm, safe and terrified and alive. We fell into a routine. I worked nights at the diner. She worked on her paintings during the day, and every morning when I came home, we'd spend hours in what she called creative sessions, her watching me carve, asking questions, learning my techniques. "Show me how you do that," she'd say, pointing at my hands, "that motion with the chisel." So I'd show, harried, guide her hands over the stone, explain the angles, teach her how to feel the grain. She was a fast learner, terrifyingly fast. Within months, she was experimenting with her own small sculptures, nothing like mine. Hers were abstract, jagged, intentionally rough. "Your style," she called it. "I'm trying to find my own voice." but I keep stealing yours. She'd laugh when she said it like it was a joke. We were more than roommates by then, more than partners. We never put a label on it, never had a conversation about what we were, but some nights, after too much wine and too little sleep, we'd fall asleep tangled together on my mattress some mornings. I'd wake up to her fingers tracing patterns on my skin some evenings. She'd kiss me so softly I thought I'd imagined I was in love with her completely desperately, the kind of love that burns so hot it blinds you, and I thought she loved me too. By March of 2009. The weeping mother was finished. He'd spent 18 months on her every spare moment, every day off. Every hour I should have been sleeping. She stood in the center of our apartment, 12 feet of white marble. So lifelike you expected her to breathe. Elena circled her slowly, reverently. She's perfect, she whispered. Ruth, she's absolutely perfect. I don't know what to do with her now. I meant it. He'd never thought past the creation. Never considered what came after. I do. Elena grabbed my hands. We enter her in the Morrison Foundation grant competition. First prize is $50,000 and a gallery showing this piece would win. I know it would. My stomach dropped. I can't afford the entry fee. I'll pay it. Elena, don't argue. She squeezed my fingers. This is what partners do. I invest in you. You invest in me. We rise together. She kissed me then, long and deep and full of promise. Trust me, she murmured against my lips, and I did. God help me, I did. She left on a Sunday, April 12th, 2009. I came home from my shift at the diner, and the apartment was empty. Not empty like she was out, empty like she was gone. Her clothes were missing, her art supplies, her suitcase, the bottle of expensive wine, the one we'd been saving to celebrate. When we heard back about the grant was gone, too, and so was the weeping mother. I stood in the space where she used to be for a long time, just stood there staring at the empty corner, at the dust marks on the floor where the base of the sculpture had sat, at the nothing where my mother's face used to be. Didn't cry, I couldn't. Shock was too complete, too absolute. It was like someone had reached into my chest and scooped out everything inside. I called her phone disconnected. I went to the community center. No one had seen Harry. Contacted the Morrison Foundation. They had no record of my entry. No record of the weeping mother, no record of anything with my name attached, but they did have a recent submission from an artist named Elena Vance, a sculpture called Maternal Grief. It's extraordinary work, the woman on the phone told me cheerfully. Miss Vance is a real talent. We've never seen anything quite like it. I hung up without responding, and I sat on my mattress in my empty apartment. And finally, I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, until my neighbors pounded on the walls, until someone called the police. 2 officers showed up at my door, hands on their holsters, asking if everything was okay. She stole my sculpture, I told them. She stole my work, and she's going to enter it in a competition under her own name, and she stole my mother's face. They looked at each other. One of them, younger, softer, crouched down to my level. Ma'am, do you have any documentation? Receipts? Photographs? I did somewhere, but I was sobbing too hard to find them. Do you know where this woman went? Have an address for her? I didn't. He didn't know anything about Elena's life before me. Just stories, just lies, ma'am. Without evidence of ownership and without a way to locate the suspect. There's not much we can do. This sounds like a civil matter. You'd need to get a lawyer. Lawyer? I couldn't afford rent. I couldn't afford food. How was I supposed to afford a lawyer? The officers left, and I stayed on the floor for 2 days. I didn't leave my apartment for 3 weeks. I called in sick to the diner until they stopped asking and just took me off the schedule. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped existing. Really, I just lay on that mattress and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how someone could do this, how someone could look you in the eyes, kiss you, hold you, tell you they saw you, and then take everything. The news reached me eventually. I was at a laundromat the first time. I'd left my building in a month when I saw it on the TV, mounted in the corner, rising art star Elena Vance wins a prestigious Morrison grant. There she was on screen, smiling, that beautiful smile, standing next to my mother's face. This piece represents my journey through grief. She was saying to the interviewer, I lost someone very dear to me, and I channeled that pain into the stone. Maternal grief is my love letter to everyone we've lost. I threw up in the trash can by the door. The sculpture was 12 feet tall, white marble veins of gray running through her flowing dress like frozen rivers. I knew every curve, every fold, every chisel mark hidden in the shadow beneath her outstretched hand because my hands made them. I stood in the center of the Whitmore Museum of Contemporary Art, surrounded by tourists and art students and couples on pretentious dates, and I couldn't breathe. My knees buckled. I grabbed the velvet rope to steady myself, and a security guard 3 feet away cleared his throat. "Ma'am, please don't touch the barriers." I didn't look at him. I couldn't look away from her. The weeping mother, that's what I called her, that's what I named her 17 years ago, in a freezing garage in Detroit with bloody knuckles and a broken heart. But the placard beside her said something different. It said, "Maternal Grief," carved by Elena Vance. 2009 on permanent loan from the Vance. Private collection. Elena Vance. The name hit me like a fist to the chest. I read it again and again. My vision blurred. My throat closed. The room started spinning, and suddenly I was that 23-year-old girl again, sobbing on a concrete floor, wondering why she left, wondering what I did wrong. Ma'am, are you all right?" The security guard was beside me now. His hand hovered near my elbow like he was afraid to touch me. Wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. "Where's the curator?" My voice came out wrong, cracked, desperate. "Excuse me?" "The curator." I was shaking now. "I need to speak to whoever runs this museum right now." He looked at me like I was crazy. "Maybe I was, ma'am. I can't just—" "That sculpture," I pointed at her at. My mother's face, frozen in stone at the grief I carved into every inch of her being. "I made that, I carved it. And I need to speak to someone who can tell me why another woman's name is on my work." The guard's expression changed. It went from concerned to suspicious in the span of a heartbeat. "I'm going to need you to calm down." "I am calm." I wasn't. "Please just get me the curator. I'm not crazy. I'm not lying. I can prove it." He reached for his radio, thought he was calling for the curator. He wasn't. "Yeah. This is Martinez at Gallery 7. I've got a situation. Female, late 30s. Early 40s, possible 5,150. She's claiming ownership of one of the permanent pieces. 5,150. Psychiatric hold." He thought I was having a mental break. No. I held up my hands. I'm a sculptor. My name is Ruth Callahan. I'm an artist. I've been an artist for 20 years. That piece right there. I carved it when I was 23 years old. I have photos. I have sketches. I have... "Ma'am, I need you to step back." 2 more guards were approaching now. A woman in a tailored navy suit followed behind them, gray hair pulled into a severe bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked expensive. She looked important. "What's going on here?" Her voice was sharp, authoritative. Martinez gestured toward me. "This woman is claiming she made the Vance piece, the marble one." She's getting agitated. The woman in the suit studied me, saw her eyes flick over my worn jacket, my scuffed boots, the calluses on my hands. I saw her judgment. "I'm Dr. Patricia Whitmore," she said, "director of this museum, and you are?" "Ruth Callahan." I said my name like it was supposed to mean something. It didn't. "Miss Callahan." Dr. Whitmore stepped closer, and I smelled expensive perfume. "That sculpture was donated to this museum 8 years ago by Elena Vance herself. It's been authenticated, documented, and appraised at over $2 million. Are you suggesting that one of the most celebrated sculptors of our generation is a fraud?" $2 million. My hands started shaking again. "Yes." The word came out as a whisper. Then louder. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I carved that piece in the winter of 2008. I finished it in March of 2009. Elena Vance was my..." I stopped. What? Was she? My mentor? My friend? My partner? The woman who destroyed my life? "She was someone I knew," I said finally, "and she stole everything from me, including that sculpture." Dr. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Doubt? Interest? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. She was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "Dr. Whitmore," Martinez said nervously, "I can have her removed." "That won't be necessary." She dialed a number, pressed the phone to her ear, and said 3 words that changed everything. "Send the police." My heart stopped. "What?" "Ma'am, you've just made an accusation of criminal fraud against a major donor to this institution." Dr. Whitmore's voice was ice. "Either you're telling the truth, in which case the police need to be involved, or you're lying, in which case The police also need to be involved. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Either way, we're going to sort this out properly. The guards were still watching me like I might explode. The tourists had started to gather. Phones out, recording end. I stood there, in the shadow of my own creation, and wondered how the hell I got here, ____ 20 years ago. I was nobody. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit with a mattress on the floor and cockroaches in the walls. I worked nights at a diner called Rosie's, slinging coffee and eggs to truck drivers and drunks who stumbled in after last call. My hands smelled like bacon grease. My back ached from standing, but every morning, when I got home, I sculpted. He'd set up a work area in the corner of my apartment. A folding table, some basic tools I'd bought at estate sales, and clay. So much clay I couldn't afford marble, I couldn't afford bronze, I couldn't even afford proper sculpting wire, but clay was cheap and clay was forgiven work until my fingers cramped, until the sun came up and my neighbors started banging on the ceiling because they could hear me. Humming I hummed when I worked old songs my mother used to sing before she got sick. She was dying, the ovarian cancer stage 4, they gave her 6 months. And she held on for almost 2 years out of pure spite. That was my mother, too stubborn to die on anyone's schedule. I used to visit her every Sunday at the hospice, used to bring her flowers from the gas station and cheap chocolates from the dollar store, used to sit beside her bed and hold her hand while she slept, and she'd always say the same thing when she woke up: "Ruthie, are you still wasting your life on that art nonsense?" She didn't mean it cruelly, she just didn't understand. My mother had worked in a factory her whole life, 40 years on the line, making parts for cars she'd never afford to drive. She believed in paychecks and pensions and practical things. Art wasn't practical. Art didn't pay the bills. Art was something rich people hung on their walls to feel special. I used to argue with her, "Mama, art is important. Art is how we remember. Art is how we grieve." She'd laugh at that, this wheezing, painful laugh that always turned into a cough. "Baby girl, when I die, I don't want you to grieve. I want you to live, get a real job, find a nice man, have some babies, be normal." I never knew how to tell her that I didn't want to be normal. Normal felt like drowning, ____. She died on a Tuesday, March 3rd, 2007. I was holding her hand when it happened. 1 second she was breathing shallow, rattling breaths that sounded like wind through dead leaves, and then she wasn't just like that. No final words, no moment of clarity, no dramatic last whisper like in the movies. She just stopped, and I sat there for an hour, just sat there holding her hand, waiting for someone to tell me what to do next. The funeral was small, 12 people, including me, some cousins I barely knew, a few of her co-workers from the factory, the pastor from the church she used to attend before she got too sick to leave the house. They lowered her into the ground on a gray March morning, and I stood at the edge of the grave with dirt under my fingernails and nothing in my heart but emptiness. That's when I started carving, not clay. This timestone I found a guy on Craigslist who was selling marble scraps from a renovation project. He wanted $200 for a block, the size of a small refrigerator. I gave him everything I had, every penny from my savings, every tip I'd earned at the diner for the past 6 months, and I dragged that block of marble into my apartment and stared at it for 3 days. I didn't know what I was going to make. I just knew I had to make something. On the 4th day, I started carving, and my mother's face emerged from the stone like she'd been waiting there all along. I met Elena Vance on a Thursday night in October 2008. It was raining, the kind of cold, miserable rain that seeps into your bones and makes you question every life choice you've ever made. I was walking home from the diner, $300 in tips stuffed into my bra because I didn't trust my coat pockets. When I passed the community center on 5th Street, there was a light on inside. A sign on the door said, "Open Studio Night. All artists welcome." I'd walked past that community center 1,000 times, never gone in, but something about that night, the rain, the cold, the loneliness made me push open the door inside. It was warm. The smell hit me first. Turpentine and clay and sawdust and coffee. It smelled like creation. A dozen people were scattered around the room. Some were painting, some were sketching. One older man was welding something in the corner, sparks flying like tiny orange stars. And then I saw her. She was standing at an easel near the window, and she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Dark hair, almost black, pulled back in a messy ponytail, sharp cheekbones, full lips, eyes, the color of honey in sunlight. She was painting something abstract, swirls of red and gold that looked like fire consuming itself. I must have stared too long, because she looked up. The attendant made me leave. I tried to fight. I really gathered every photo I had, blurry shots taken on a disposable camera, pictures of me working on the sculpture, my hands covered in marble dust. I found my sketches, my notes, the receipts. From the guy on Craigslist who sold me the marble, I went to 3 different lawyers. They all said the same thing, Miss Callahan. Elena Vance is represented by one of the most powerful law firms in the country. Her family has resources you can't imagine, even if you have a case and the documentation you've shown me is compelling. Pursuing this could take years, decades. And it would cost you everything. I don't have anything left to lose. The lawyer looked at me with something like pity. You have your freedom, Miss. Vance's attorneys would bury you in defamation suits before you could blink. They'd destroy your reputation. Your credit, your ability to ever work again, is that worth it? I didn't have an answer, so I stopped fighting. I let her have ID. Let her have the sculpture and the prize money and the gallery showing and the career that should have been mine. And I tried to move. Oni got a new job, warehouse work, night shifts, loading boxes onto trucks until my back screamed. I stopped making art, couldn't bring myself to touch clay or stone or anything that reminded me of what I'd lost. I moved to a new apartment, then a new city, then another, running from her, running from the memory, running from myself. 17 years. That's how long. Ronnie worked in warehouses, factories, shipping yards. I moved to Cleveland, then Pittsburgh, then Philadelphia. I got married once, a quiet man named David who worked at the same fulfillment center. He was kind, patient. He didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer. We lasted 4 years before he told me he felt like he was living with a ghost. You're not here, Ruth, he said the night he left. You haven't been here since the day I met you, wherever you are. It's not with me. He was right. I was still in that apartment in Detroit, still standing in the empty space where she used to bay. Started sculpting again after the divorce, not marble. They couldn't afford it, and the weight of it still felt like grief, but clay, small pieces, figures, and faces and forms that I made in my basement and then destroyed before anyone could see them. It was therapy, or maybe punishment. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I tried not to follow Elena's career, but she was everywhere. Magazine covers, museum exhibits, profiles in the New York Times about the reclusive genius who emerged from nowhere to revolutionize contemporary sculpture. Built an empire on my mother's face. Every piece she created after maternal grief, borrowed from what I'd taught her, the technique, the emotion, the way of seeing. She'd taken my soul and turned it into a brand. And the world called her brilliant. I was 40 years old when I finally stopped running it. Ended up in Boston, working in a hotel laundry room, pressing sheets for tourists who never looked me in the eye. One night, I was folding towels when I heard 2 coworkers talking. Did you see that exhibit at the Whitmore, the marble sculptures? No, I'm not into all that museum stuff, girl. You don't have to be into art to appreciate Elena Vance. That woman is a goddess. I dropped the towel I was holding. Where? My voice came out harsher than I intended. Where is the exhibit? They both stared at me. The Whitmore Museum, one of them said slowly. Downtown. Why, you a fan? A fan if she only knew. And now here I was sitting in a small, sterile room in the back of the Whitmore Museum, across from 2 police officers and the stone-faced Dr. Patricia Whitmore. The fluorescent lights hummed, the clock on the wall ticked, and I was explaining, for the 3rd time, how a sculpture worth $2 million was actually mine. Let me get this straight. The older officer, Detective Morrison, his badge said, leaned back in his chair. You're claiming that you created this piece 17 years ago in Detroit, and that Elena Vance, who is one of the most celebrated artists in the country, stole it from your apartment? Yes. And you never reported this to the police? I did. They told me it was a civil matter. Do you have any records of that report? My stomach sank. No, it was 17 years ago. I wasn't thinking about documentation. I was barely surviving. Detective Morrison exchanged a glance with his partner. I knew what that look meant. Crazy woman, sad story. No proof, Miss Callahan. Dr. Whitmore spoke up. Elena Vance has extensive documentation of her creative process, photographs, video, journals, correspondence with galleries. Her provenance is impeccable. Of course it is. I leaned forward. She had years to create a paper trail. She stole my work and then built a lie around it. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Silence. The younger officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, do you have any documentation? Anything at all that proves you created this sculpture? I thought about the photos in my storage unit, the sketches, the receipts. Yes, I said, I have photos of me working on the piece sketches from before I even started carving a receipt for the marble. Receipts can be fabricated. These weren't. And where are these items now? In a storage unit in Pittsburgh. I've been moving around. I didn't think I'd ever need them. Detective Morrison sighed. Miss Callahan, here's the situation. You've made a public accusation against a major donor to this institution. If your claims are true, then a crime has been committed. But if they're false, you may have committed a crime, defamation, making false statements, causing a public disturbance. My hands were shaking. I'm not lying. Then you need to prove it. He slid a card across the table. Get your documentation. Bring it to me. In the meantime, I'd advise you to refrain from making any further public statements about Miss Vance. He stood up. You're free to go. I drove to Pittsburgh that night, 15 hours straight, no stops, no sleep, just the dark highway and the radio and the drumbeat of my heart in my chest. You need to prove it. 17 years of evidence, 17 years of holding on to fragments of a life I'd tried to forget. Please, God, let them still be there. The storage unit was on the outskirts of the city, in a facility that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. I'd been paying $30 a month for 17 years to keep a past I didn't want to remember. Now it was going to save. May unlocked the padlock with trembling fingers, pulled up the metal door, and stared into the darkness. It took me 3 hours to find everything. Boxes within boxes, memories I'd tried to bury, but they were there. The photos, a whole envelope of them, dated on the back, in my handwriting, pictures of me, covered in marble dust, chisel in hand, my mother's face emerging from the stone behind me, the sketches, dozens of them, on cheap paper, my signature in the corner, dated 2007 and 2008, the receipt from the Craigslist seller, crinkled and faded but legible, with his name and phone number scrawled at the bottom, and something I'd forgotten about entirely, a video. Elena had borrowed my camera once, a cheap digital thing I'd bought at a pawn shop, and recorded herself interviewing me about my process. She'd called it documentation, had called it flattery. Now I called it proof, because on that video, clear as day, was me standing next to the weeping mother, explaining every detail of her creation, and Elena's voice behind the camera. This is going to make you famous, Ruth. I can feel it. I couldn't afford a lawyer, but I found one anyway. Her name was Margot Kensington. She was 72 years old, semi-retired, and ran a pro bono practice out of a converted brownstone in South Boston. I don't take cases for money, she told me when I walked in. I take cases for justice. Tell me your story. So I did the whole thing from the beginning. Margot listened, with her hands folded and her eyes sharp. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Show me the evidence. I spread it across her desk, the photos, the sketches, the receipt, and the video. She watched the entire thing without speaking. When it ended, she looked up at me. Miss Callahan, I've been practicing law for 47 years. I've seen a lot of cases. Most of them are complicated gray areas, uncertain facts, competing narratives. She tapped the video. This is not one of those cases. This is as clear as anything I've ever seen. Elena Vance stole your work, and I'm going to help you prove it. The first move was a cease and desist letter. Margot drafted it herself, 10 pages of legal language demanding that Elena Vance acknowledge my authorship of The Weeping Mother and compensate me for 17 years of stolen revenue. We sent it certified mail to her gallery, her studio, and her Connecticut mansion. The response came 3 days later, not a letter, phone call from Elena herself. I was in Margot's office when it happened. The phone rang. Margot answered, and I watched her face change. Yes, she's here. Put her through. She hit the speaker button, and then I heard her voice. Ruth, 17 years since. I'd heard that voice. It still sounded like honey, like poison dipped in gold. Hello? Elena. A long pause. I was wondering when you'd come back. You knew I would. I hoped you wouldn't. I hoped you'd moved on, built a life, found happiness. I did build a life. My voice cracked. You just stole it first. Another pause. Then We should talk. In person, just the two of us. Miss Callahan is not going anywhere without representation. Margot cut in. If you want to discuss a settlement, I don't want to discuss a settlement. Elena's voice hardened. I want to talk to Ruth alone. She knows where to find me. The line went dead. Don't go, Margot said. I have to. She manipulate you. That's what people like her do. I know. I stood up. But I need to look her in the eyes. I need to hear her say it. I've been waiting 17 years for that moment. Margot sighed. At least let me send someone with you. No. This is between us. Elena's studio was in a converted warehouse in Soho, exposed brick. 20-foot ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. It probably cost more than I'd made in my entire life. The door was unlocked. I walked in. She was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by half-finished sculptures, marble, bronze, stone, none of them as beautiful as the Weeping Mother, none of them hers. She turned when she heard my footsteps, and I saw her face for the first time in 17 years. Aged we both had, but she'd aged well. Silver threads in her dark hair, lines around her eyes that looked like wisdom instead of where she looked expensive. She looked successful. She looked like everything I should have been. Ruth. She breathed my name like a prayer. You look like someone who's worked in warehouses for 2 decades? She flinched. Good. I didn't mean, what do you want, Elena? Why am I here? She moved toward May, stepped back. I want to explain. There's nothing to explain. You stole my work. You built a career on my talent. You left me with nothing. I know. The admission hit me like a slap. You know? Of course I know. Her eyes were wet. Ruth, I've known since the moment I left. Every award, every accolade, every article about my genius, it's all been a lie, and I've been living with that lie for 17 years. I stared at her. Then why? If you knew it was wrong, why did you do it? She was silent for a long moment when she spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. Because I wasn't talented enough. She told me everything. The gallery showings where no one bought her work, the rejection, letters from grants and residencies, the way her family mocked her for playing artist when she could have been running their business empire. I was drowning. She said, I was failing, and then I met you. She looked at the floor. You were everything I wanted to be, raw, authentic, brilliant. I watched you create something extraordinary out of nothing but grief and love, and I knew that I would never make anything that good. Her voice broke. So I took it. I wanted to feel vindicated, triumphant. All I felt was empty. That's not an excuse. I know it's not. That sculpture was my mother. My love for her, my grief. You didn't just steal a piece of art. You stole the most personal thing I've ever created. I know. Stop saying that. I was shouting now. Stop saying you know. If you knew, you would have stopped. You would have given it back. You would have told the truth. I tried. When? 100 times 1,000. She looked up, and her face was wet with tears. Every time I stood next to that sculpture and someone called it mine, I wanted to scream, but I was in too deep. Too many people believed the lie too much. Money had changed hands. If I came forward, I'd lose everything. You'd lose everything. I laughed bitterly. What about me? What about what I lost? She had no answer for that. We stood in silence for a long time. The light through the windows shifted from gold to orange to red finally. Elena spoke. I'll do it. Do what? I'll tell the truth publicly. I'll admit that I stole your work. I'll transfer all the proceeds from the sculpture to you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I didn't trust Harry, couldn't. Why now? Because you got caught? Because I'm tired. She wiped her eyes. I've been carrying this guilt for 17 years. It's been eating me alive. Every award, every interview, every moment of success, it all tastes like ash. I thought I could outrun it. I thought if I just kept going, kept creating, kept pretending, eventually the lie would become the truth. She shook her head. It doesn't work like that. I left without agreeing to anything. I needed time. I needed to think. I needed to figure out if I could ever forgive a woman who had stolen 17 years of my life. Elena kept her word. 2 weeks after our meeting, she held a press conference. The art world watched in stunned silence as she admitted everything. I did not create maternal grief, she said, her voice steady despite the flashbulbs. That sculpture was made by an artist named Ruth Callahan. I stole it from her in 2009 and claimed it as my own. Every accolade I've received for that piece belongs to her. The room exploded. The fallout was immediate. Museums pulled her work, galleries canceled her shows, collectors sued for refunds. The Vance family released a statement expressing deep disappointment and cutting off all financial ties within a month. Elena Vance was a pariah. Within a year, she was bankrupt. And me. I got the sculpture back. The weeping mother was returned to me in a private ceremony at the Whitmore Museum. Dr. Patricia Whitmore, the same woman who had called the police on me, stood before a crowd of journalists and art critics and said the words I'd waited 17 years to hear. "We are honored to restore this masterpiece to its rightful creator. Ruth Callahan is one of the most talented sculptors of our generation, and her work deserves to be celebrated." I stood beside my mother's face. I put my hand on her cold marble cheek hand. I wept. I started creating again, not for galleries, not for awards. For myself, I set up a small studio in Boston, nothing fancy, just a garage. I converted with the settlement money from Elena's estate. I work in clay now and marble. When I can afford, I make what I want to make. I sell what I want to sell, and I finally feel like myself again. Elena reached out once, a letter, handwritten on cheap paper. "Ruth, I know I can never undo what I did. I know sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that watching you get your recognition has been the first peace I've felt in 17 years. I hope you find everything you deserve." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Some wounds are too deep for words, but last month, I read in the paper that she'd started teaching free sculpture classes at a community center in Detroit, the same community center where we met. She's using her real skills now, not stolen ones. She's learning to create something of her own. Maybe that's the closest thing to redemption she ever get. Maybe that's enough. My mother's sculpture stands in my studio now, not in a museum, not behind velvet ropes, just here with me where she belongs some nights. I sit with Harry, tell her about my day, about the new piece I'm working on, about the way the light hits the marble just right at sunset, and sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see her smile. I'm 51 years old. I've been a sculptor for almost 30 years, and I finally know what my mother was trying to tell me. Art isn't about fame, it's not about money, it's not about recognition or validation or proving yourself to anyone. Art is about love, it's about grief, it's about taking the most painful parts of yourself and transforming them into something beautiful. Elena stole my work, but she couldn't steal the gift that let me create it. The gift belongs to me. It always has, and now, finally, the world knows it too.